In this video, I was originally going to talk about the top 10 genres I would like to see more of in RPGs. But as I was making that list, I realized that the genre that I wanted to see most was that of exploration. So I switched order. Next week will be the top 10 list, and this week I'm going to be talking about my Grail game, the game that I want to find above all else. My Grail game is a game that I don't think has been created yet, and it's a game where exploration is the core focus of the RPG. Now, what do I mean when I say core focus? Let's take two different games and compare them. The first is going to be 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, because most people are familiar with that, and the second is going to be Forbidden Lands. Now, in 5th edition, when you are creating a character, most of what you pick relates back to combat in some way. So your attributes, your strength, your dexterity, your intelligence, those things feed into combat quite a bit. Your class and your species feed into combat quite a bit. Most importantly, your level progression feeds into combat. So after reading the player's handbook, any type of gamer could look at Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition and realize, oh, the core mechanic of Dungeons & Dragons is combat. It's and that's true. It's very, very hard to run a 5th edition game without combat, because almost every single system within 5th edition feeds back into combat in some way and makes you better at combat, makes you harder to kill in combat, makes you more efficient in combat, makes you faster, blah, 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 blah. All right, so that's 5th edition. 5th edition is a combat-focused game. If we compare that with something like Forbidden Lands, we'll find another mechanic that takes front stage, at least for a part of the game, and that is the mechanic of exploration. In Forbidden Lands, let me explain the setting of Forbidden Lands first. Forbidden Lands has a very cool idea for a setting. And the idea is that the land that your character has lived in has been surrounded by blood mist for as long as you can remember. And blood mist is this mist that comes out at night, and anybody caught in the blood mist is going to be torn apart by horrible demonic creatures, right? So the result of that is that you have a home where you're safe, and during the day you can really only venture out as far as you can from your home in a way that you can return before the blood mist comes at night. So that means people are limited to the land about a few hours from their home, and they need to get back to their home before night, or they need to guarantee that they can make the 12-hour trip from point A to point B and get to shelter at point B before that blood mist comes. And then, of course, they're in trouble if they're outside for the blood mist. The idea in Forbidden Lands is that the blood mist has disappeared. The land is now free and open, and for the first time in like 200 years or something like that, you can go from point A to point C without needing to find shelter along the way. And this is a very, very cool setup when it comes to exploration, because the entire beginning, in my opinion, of Forbidden Lands is focused on exploration. It is a very, very cool system. I'll show you. Probably the biggest selling point for Forbidden Lands being an explorative system is this giant map. This is the map. It's two-sided, that comes with Forbidden Lands, and it also comes with stickers that allow you to put, things on the map that you find as you go along. And so Forbidden Lands has a lot of, especially at the start of the game, a lot of very cool gameplay mechanics and motivations around the idea of exploration, exploring the land beyond where you've been since the blood mist had arrived. The problem that I have with Forbidden Lands is that the exploration really only exists at the start of the game. I mean, it's still kind of there along the whole way because the map is so big and there's quite a bit to explore. But when you look at the other mechanics of the game, a lot of them, even though they're done in a different way, they mirror the same type of things that you see in 5th edition. Characters are combat focused. Magic is combat focused. Some of the environments are exploration focused, which is very cool. Like, you might find an old hut in the forest, and that helps you seek shelter and avoid some of the weathering that you might get from like an ice storm or something like that. And those are cool exploration mechanics, but many of the other things that occur in the game, like the fortresses you might find or the monsters you might find, they're all focused around combat. And It's a very cool system. I'm not taking anything away from Forbidden Lands, but it doesn't quite get to what I'm looking for my Grail game, where exploration is the core focus of the gameplay. Forbidden Lands, like I said, very cool because exploration is front and center, especially at the beginning of the game, but combat is still really where a lot of the parts of the game, the mechanics of the game lead into combat, and it's still a combat-focused game. So I'm going to put this down, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what an exploration-focused game might look like. Now, we've already talked about how 5th edition and even Forbidden Lands, to a lesser extent, the core mechanics feed into combat. But an exploration-focused game, the core mechanics would feed into exploration in some way. And this would be challenging to do, I think, number one, because it hasn't been done before, so there's not the groundwork that you saw in the original versions of Dungeons and Dragons that almost every other RPG has kind of stood on the shoulders of. But also, there's exploration it's challenging not to get stale, right? When you have a map that you're exploring like this, and you go to this hex right here. Come on, map, open up. You go to this, we'll hold it like this. You go to this hex right here and you find out what's there. Exploration just disappears. It's over because you've discovered what's on that hex. And the only thing to do left is to go to another hex. There are, of course, ways around that, but you would need to build those structures into the game so that exploration continues to be fun and refreshing, even if you've walked across the entire map. Okay, so what would that look like? If I was going to look at the mechanics of an exploration game, we would want them to all lead into exploration in some way. One of the ways you could do that is one of your core mechanics as you advance or learn, or maybe it's like a class benefit, or your attributes can improve it, is the idea of exploring better. So this could be exploring faster in different types of terrain. I imagine like a ranger might have a better exploration in a forest, for example, or you could even choose the biome you're better in. So if you imagine it takes 10, I don't know, like 10 or 1 day to explore 10 miles or something like that. Maybe it takes 1 day to explore 15 miles, and you can be a little bit faster or a little bit better when you're exploring. Maybe instead of being faster, it's being able to find things better. And so when you're searching for something, like you're searching for shelter, you have a better opportunity at finding it if you're a certain type of class, or you have a certain feat or skill, or your attributes are higher. So these core attributes, the core ideas of a role-playing game, instead of feeding it in combat, where you can hit harder, hit better, it would feed into exploration, where you could move faster or you could find better. So that's one way you could do it. Another way is the idea of access. As your character improves, you can improve the access that they have to the environment around them. So imagine this, your character is exploring a map or something like some ground or something like that, and they find some mountains. So they follow a canyon into the mountains, hoping to find a mountain pass. They get to the end of the canyon and there's a sheer cliff face going up. And of course they look up and say, oh, I can't climb that. So they have to turn around and move on. Now they know that that cliff face is there, but as they continue to explore and earn experience from exploring, they realize that when they level up, they can earn a skill called climbing. And the climbing allows them to climb sheer cliff faces. Well, now they have an incentive to go back to that canyon, back to that sheer cliff face and climb it, because now they can get over the top of it. They can get up into the mountains and find out what's in the mountains, what's beyond the mountains. And that is another way that you can use mechanics to try and support the idea that, oh, our characters, there's blockers to their access to certain areas, and then you can earn experience, earn skills. Your attributes can help you in removing those blockers, and you now have better access to these other areas of the map. You can explore these things that were previously blocked off for you. And then finally, maybe the most important thing when it comes to an exploration game is the idea of conflict. Dungeons and Dragons has conflict in it, and the main conflict is combat. And the reason for that is probably because it evolved from a war game, which has combat as the main conflict, right? And so almost every single role-playing game out there has combat as the core of conflict. Now, there's plenty of role-playing games out there that don't have combat at the center of conflict, but many of them do. There are some games that claim to be exploration games that have other things at the core of the conflict, and they're close, but they're not quite there. Some of these games have resource management at the core of their conflict when you play the game, and some of them have survival at the core of the conflict when you play the game. The problem is these are not exploration-focused games, exploration is a mode in which to engage with the core conflict better. So for example, in a survival game, you have one day of food left. How do you get more food? Well, you have to go beyond the next hill and hunt or forage what's over there because you haven't been there yet, and that's going to help you survive for longer. So exploration allows you to engage with the survival mechanics, but it's not, the exploration drives the survival, it's not the other way around. Same thing with resource management. Usually in resource management games, it's all about becoming more efficient with your resources, and the way to do that is to get more materials. And how do you do that? Well, you have to go over the next hill, find some materials there that you haven't used yet, and then you can become more efficient. But again, it's the resource management that or the exploration drives the resource management, and it's not the other way around. And so at the core of these games, you're playing a survival game, you're playing a resource management game that have exploration components, but exploration isn't at the center of that gameplay experience. And in my Grail game, exploration would truly be at the center of the experience. Now, it's really hard, I think, to introduce a conflict to an exploration game that doesn't devolve into combat or doesn't devolve into resource management or survival or something like that. But one way that it could work is through the idea of time, and have time be the biggest conflict for your character. If you consider maybe your character is off on some sort of exploratory mission and you only have a certain amount of days of resources or supplies or something like that, now all of a sudden you don't need to worry about resources. It's not a resource management game because that's a fixed number, and every single day that number ticks down. What you have to worry about is deciding where you're going to go during exploration. What you have to worry about is figuring out how to explore better, and it's the time, the conflict with time, that drives your experience in exploration rather than the other way around. And I think that's one way to introduce conflict into an exploration-focused game without it turning into a different type of genre of play. So I've talked a little bit about what type of game I would want in an exploration-focused game, and why something like Forbidden Lands gets close but isn't all the way there. And I've talked a little bit about how you can have some of the character mechanics support exploration as opposed to something like combat or survival or something like that. The last thing I want to talk a little bit about is what designing that type of world would look like. Now, I've done a little bit of brainstorming on this. I have one game concept that I might never pick up again because it's a huge project, but I've thought about this, and I think that there are ways to run a really fun exploration-focused game that's really well designed, but it really stays true to the idea that your goal is to explore rather than do some of these other things like manage your resources. So in my mind, when you think about exploring in a game, there are kind of 4 levels of exploration. There's probably more that you could brainstorm, but these are the 4 that I came up with. The first is the idea of overland travel and overland discovery. So again, this is the most basic. You consider the Forbidden Lands map. This is what Forbidden Lands does at the beginning of the game. You start, I don't know, here, and you got to figure out what's over here, and over here, and over here. And you just kind of move around the map trying to figure out, oh, what's beyond the next hill? And that in itself is a very, very fun mechanic. It's super enjoyable whether you're playing a board game, a role-playing game. It's kind of like uncovering secrets, and there's a lot of really positive feedback around that. The problem with that being the only design supporting exploration is that once you explore the hex and you've been over that hill, there's nothing else to do there. The only thing to do is go over the next hill. And at some point, you're going to run out of hills, you're going to run out of hexes to explore, and the game is over, or you need to move on to a different part of the gameplay, which is what Forbidden Lands does. And there's combat, there's other things, base buildings, things like that. So the second thing that can drive exploration within the idea of exploration design is one of legends and mysteries, right? So let's say you have you hiked through the East Mountains and you head west to the Forest of Souls or something like that. And it's in the Forest of Souls, you find a hut. And you go in the hut, you find some old papers, and the old papers talk about a treasure that's hidden in the East Mountains. Okay, well, I was just over in the East Mountains, so I know a little bit about them, but now I have a piece of paper here that says there's a treasure there. So that's kind of like a hook. That's some player motivation to let me know that, or let the player know that, there's something more to do over there, so I can go get that if I find out how to get to this or how to do this treasure map. But there's only half the treasure map there. You're like, okay, where's the rest of the treasure map? Well, you find out through these papers that the person who used to live in this house also had a place down in the southern swamp, and there might be more papers there. So now you trudge through the Forest of Souls, you get to the southern swamp, you find their other hut, you find the other half of the map, then you head over to the east to the mountains, and you start looking for treasure. What this idea does is it takes the idea of overland exploration and it adds hooks, player hooks, character hooks. It adds motivation for people to go here or there based on the clues that they receive. And there's a lot of ways you can do this. You don't need to use treasure, but there's a lot of different ways you can kind of move players into this area. Now, the third layer now, if you consider overland travel, legends and mysteries, kind of the first two layers of that design idea, the third layer then is to add blockers and hidden areas. So again, if we go back to my canyon idea, if we're looking for treasure in the East Mountains and we head down the canyon and we come to that sheer cliff face, oh, well, you can't get to the treasure because you have to climb this canyon wall and you don't know how. So maybe you go back, you do some other stuff later, you level up, you find out, oh, I now can climb, I have the experience to do that. You come back, you climb the cliff wall, and boom, you can get to the treasure. That allows you to keep it fresh as you revisit other areas. But that's not the only thing, the only way you can really do that. In the computer game Civilization, Civ 5, Civ 4, Civ 6, whatever you happen to play, there is a really cool mechanic that I always love. And when you advance in your technology tree, maybe you find out how to use a combustible engine, maybe you find out how to use nuclear power, new resources pop up on your map. So maybe you have a desert region on the map that nobody cares about, no civilizations care about in the game Civilizations, and you research the combustible engine, and then all of a sudden, boom, oil pops up in that desert region. And it's like, well, we need to go get that oil. Same thing with nuclear power. Uranium pops up on the map, and all of a sudden these places that were previously irrelevant all of a sudden become very, very relevant going forward in the game. And you can do the same thing in an exploration game. When you think about, one of the ideas I had was, you know, maybe you find some sort of spell that allows you to reveal a portal to the land of the fairies, right? And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I've explored half of the map, but now I have this new technology that allows me to go back to the areas I've explored and see it in a new way and see kind of this new environment, this fairy environment, and I might find something exciting, like a portal to the fairyland, the land of the fairies, that then leads you to more places to explore. And so I think there's kind of this idea of hidden items, a hidden environment beyond the initial environment that you explored that allow you to go back and see this new environment in a new light. And I think that is another way that you can refresh the idea of exploration without shifting genres or shifting mechanics into something else like combat. And then finally, I call this collections. It's not a good name, but the idea is that as you are exploring, you're going to find a bunch of random stuff, right? You might find letters, you might find poems from somebody, you might find different ingredients from here or there, you might find small little like weapons here or there, and a lot of those you probably won't care about initially. But maybe about halfway through the game, you realize, oh, those poems that I was reading here and there, those are all from a collection from a very famous poet from a long time ago that I didn't know about until now. So now I have a reason to go back and find those again and try and collect them because I have this motivation to grab these extra items that I didn't have before. And I think using this idea of collections can help, again, refresh some of the old terrain that you've already been across, the old hexes, and allow you to see it in a new light so that the game gets less tiresome. So I guess the whole point of this video is to point out that, first of all, I have not found my Grail game. Of course, my Grail game being an exploration-focused game where all of the mechanics feed into the idea of exploration in the same way that all of 5th edition's mechanics feed into combat. So I haven't found that yet. If you know of a game that does this, please let me know in the comments. Put it in there. I'm going to go play it if I see something that looks good. I just haven't found this game. I've been looking and looking and looking. I've done some practice design work. It seems like a lot of work, which is maybe why it hasn't been done before. But I really want to play a game that is almost like completely focused on exploration. So if you know of one, please let me know. I do appreciate you also listening because this was kind of a random video I put out there. Again, next week I'll go to my top 10 genres I would like to see more of in RPGs. But I wanted to get this off my plate because it was on the top of my mind as I was scripting the other video out, and it's going to be pretty high on my top 10 list for the next week's video as well. So thank you so much for listening. I have comments below if you want to check out some of the stuff I design, but I appreciate you and I appreciate you listening. I'll see you in the next video.